What's going on, family? Scrapbook Boxing. Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I'm showing you here something very special to me. I put this together with my dad years ago. And what this is, 1920 to 1962. Every fighter that fought in Madison Square Garden. It's 100 pages. And they're inserts of the Madison Square Garden programs. And we put this, it's probably, we put this together in like 3 months. But it's 100 pages of what I'm showing you here. And like I said, every single fighter, every last fighter that fought at Madison Square Garden from 1920 to about 1962. Every last one of them. But I'm just going to show you 2 pages. I'll probably do a series out of this. But we're going to start off with these 2 pages here. I'm going to break these fighters down for you. And I'm going to go at the top of the head like I always do. So I know them all like the back of my hand. So let's have a little fun. I'm going to break these fighters down, these 2 pages, and then we'll do them in series. Now, a lot of the fighters that I'm showing you here today are fighters who had some great fights in Madison Square Garden. And Madison Square Garden has moved several times since the first fighter in this scrapbook has fought there. So a lot of the fighters I'm showing you here are from the 40s and the 50s. And we're going to start off with Bob Satterfield. He's to your left. And you have Danny Nardico to your right. So Bob Satterfield was born November 9th, 1923 in St. Louis, Missouri. He fought out of Chicago, Illinois. He died in St. Louis, Missouri as well, June 1st, 1977. If I remember correctly, 2003 Ring Magazine had Bob Satterfield in the top 100 greatest punches of all time. That's quite of an accomplishment. He fought in the Chicago Golden Gloves as a welterweight in 1941. He had total bouts of 78 fights, 50 wins, 35 KOs, 25 losses. He was stopped 13 times and had 4 draws. He was a 6'2" heavyweight that was in a ring with fighters such as Harold Carter. Now, Harold Carter was some puncher. He fought him twice. He was in a ring with Johnny Holman. Johnny Holman would fight most of his fights in the Olympic Auditorium. That was in California, on the West Coast. But he was up there with guys such as Bob Baker and all of them guys, Johnny Holman. And I had a lot of respect for Johnny Holman. Mr. Boxing Today, too, he would know a lot about Johnny Holman and Bob Baker and a lot of those guys. But Johnny Holman was some fighter. Salute to Mr. Boxing Today, too. Frankie Daniels, another great fighter. Cleveland Williams, one of the hardest punchers of his day. He was in the ring with Sonny Liston. He was stopped 2 times with Liston. But they did give Cleveland Williams a chance. Now, when he fought Muhammad Ali at the Houston Astrodome, shortly before that, he was shot by a police officer. Pulled him over randomly. And it was said that Cleveland Williams was scuffling and everything else. But you got to remember, at that time, in the 1960s, anything could have been said. And unfortunately for Cleveland Williams, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Bob Satterfield was in the ring with Bob Baker. Now, Bob Baker was ranked number 2 in 1956. Rocky Marciano had hung up his gloves after defeating Archie Moore in 1955. So he stepped to the side to look at the landscape. He retired. Bob Baker was number 2. Tommy Hurricane Jackson was number 1. And Bob Satterfield had to face Bob Baker. At that time, you had Nino Valdez. You had all those great heavyweights at that time. But Bob Baker was some fighter. Satterfield was in the ring with Archie Moore. Archie Moore was in the ring with basically everybody in boxing history, if you will. But that was an outstanding fight as well. Satterfield was in the ring with Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles was the Cincinnati Cobra. He would win the heavyweight championship belt in 1949. He would win that belt when he would defeat Jersey Joe Walcott. That belt would be the NBA version of the heavyweight strap when Joe Louis had retired. And Jersey Joe Walcott was given a shot because they felt as though he got a raw deal in 48. So the belt was basically in the air and Eddie Charles and Joe Walcott would fight for it. It was an elimination bout. And Eddie Charles would defeat Jersey Joe Walcott, so he would become the NBA version of the heavyweight championship medal. So he would have to face Joe Louis, to solidify the title in 1950, and then he would become the World Heavyweight Championship title holder. But then he would get knocked out in 51 by Jersey Joe Walcott. But Eddie Charles was some fighter. He was in the ring with everybody you can think of. Phenomenal fighter was Eddie Charles. And I did profile on a lot of these fighters, so you can type their names in and you should be able to find them in the Scrapbook Boxing. Bob Satterfield was in the ring with Charlie Doc Williams. Charlie Doc Williams was some fighter. So that's just an idea of some of the fighters that Bob Satterfield was in the ring with. He was the kind of fighter, either you're going to get knocked out or I'm knocking you out. Somebody's going to be on their back, and it's going to be a knockout. So Bob Satterfield was some fighter. He reminded me of an Derek Jefferson, excuse me. Derek Jefferson was some fighter, but he reminded me of Bob Satterfield. So salute to Bob Satterfield. Danny Nardico was born July 3rd, 1927 in Tampa, Florida. He had total bouts of 67 fights, 50 wins, 35 knockouts, 13 losses, and he was stopped 4 times. He had 4 draws. And I remember Charlie Norcus facing Danny Nardico. They fought Miami Beach at the auditorium there. It was on a Wednesday, January 20th, 1954. My dad told me about that fight. He was at that fight. And he told me that was one of the most exciting fights that he's seen in the heavyweight division. You see, Charlie Norcus was a heavyweight. Danny Nardico was actually a light heavyweight. Danny Nardico was the first to stop Jake LaMotta. Ray Robinson stopped Jake LaMotta in 51. And he 13th round, he knocked him out against the ropes. But it's the first time he's actually been down. So that's the distinction with Danny Nardico. And it was a 10-round scheduled fight, between Danny Nardico and Charlie Norcus. It only went 9 rounds. Both men were down several times. Like I said, it was the most exciting heavyweight fight in boxing. One of my favorites. I watch that as often as I can. Lou Selica is the next guy we're going to be looking at. He's to your left. Here we go. That's Lou Selica. He's to your left. So Lou Selica, what can I tell you about him? He was born July 26, 1913 in Brooklyn, New York. He died January 30th, 2002 in Brooklyn, New York as well. He stood 5 foot 4 inches. He weighed 116 to like 122 pounds. I know he was an NBA bantamweight champion and the world bantamweight champion. He was in the ring with fighters such as Cisco Escobar, who was a champion. Midget Wargas, he was a champion. Richie Lamas, another fighter who was a champion. Pete DeGrassi, he was a phenomenal fighter. Very, very good fighter was Pete DeGrassi. I rate him as one of my favorite fighters as well, Pete DeGrassi. Who else was in the ring with? Smalls Montana, he was a champion. Georgie Pace, he was a bantamweight champion in 1940. It's interesting with Georgie Pace because he was the bantamweight champion in 1940. Henry Armstrong was trying to become the welterweight champion. A middleweight champion, I should say, in 1940 by defeating Severino Garcia. And referee George Blake was the referee at that time. They called it a 10-round draw. And it was unfortunate because Joe Louis was the heavyweight champion. John Henry Lewis had just lost his belt in 1939 because of an eye injury, medical issues with his eye. And it's funny because if Henry Armstrong could have gotten that belt, he still had his belt, in the welterweight division, as well as the lightweight division. So it's interesting to see how that would have panned out, because you would have had Georgie Pace as a bantamweight, Henry Armstrong as a lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight. That would have been interesting. As well as John Henry Lewis. Well, he wasn't champion anymore, but he was still, regarded undefeated champion, as well as Joe Louis being the heavyweight champion. So that would have been interesting with Georgie Pace. Lou Selica was also in the ring with Manuel Ortiz. He was a bantamweight champion. Bobby Pancho, Julian Echeverria. Very good fighters I'm naming here. But that's just a handful of fighters that Lou Selica would face. And he was a dynamite fighter. You got Pat Kaminsky. Pat Kaminsky, I met him personally. And he was from Paterson, New Jersey. He was introduced into the New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame in 2018. I was at that ceremony. He died November 1st, 2006. He was born October 27th, 1920, I believe. He was 6'3" and he died, and a lot of people didn't know quite who he was, but he was some fighter. He was some fighter, Pat Kaminsky. He had total bouts of 88, 74 wins, 12 losses, 2 draws. He fought Max Baer in 1940 in Jersey City at the Roosevelt Stadium. And every time I watched that fight, it's one of the most, it was well-timed. Pat Kaminsky ran into Max Baer's right hand. And Max Baer was basically over the hill at that time. He got beat up real bad by Lou Nova. But when Pat Kaminsky ran into that right hand of Max Baer, it reminded me of when Mike Tyson knocked out the White Buffalo. Now these are the pictures I showed you before when I accidentally showed it to you. I was trying to show you Pat Kaminsky and Lou Selica. Here you have Dave Davey and Jimmy Bivins. Now Dave Davey was a very good heavyweight. He was born March 18th, 1929, and he fought out of Tacoma, Washington. Now, Tacoma, Washington had produced a lot of very good fighters. You have Freddie Steele, who became middleweight champion of the world. You had Rocky Lockridge, who's a featherweight. And Rocky Lockridge fought out of Paterson, New Jersey, but he was originally from Tacoma, Washington. You also had a fighter by the name of Johnny Bump City Bumpus. He was born Tacoma, Washington. In fact, him and Rocky Lockridge trained in the same gyms. And they both went to Paterson, New Jersey on the main events, Lou Duva's, management. But you also had Leo Rudolph. He was in the 1976 Olympic Games. So you had some pretty good fighters out of Tacoma, Washington. But Dave Davey had total fights of 40 fights, 33 wins, 11 KOs, 5 losses. Was he stopped? I think he was stopped once. I believe he was stopped once. And he fought out of Cliffside Park, New Jersey. That's where he resided. And he fought Charlie Norcus. Charlie Norcus was a heavyweight. He was a phenomenal fighter. Like I said, he fought Danny Nardico. And Davey Day was also in the ring with Keen Simmons. Keen Simmons, so you had a lot of fighters like Keen Simmons. Nino Valdez came up at that time as well. Johnny Holman, Satterfield, all those guys came up at that time. So Keen Simmons was a very, he was a club fighter. Decent fighter was Keen Simmons. Jimmy Bivens. Jimmy Bivens was born December 6, 1919 in Dry Brook, Georgia. Now he fought out of Cleveland, Ohio. He was very good friends with Ezra Charles. And he died July 4th, 2012. I met him. Jimmy Bivens was a very nice guy. I met him several times. And he would win the AAU Welterweight Championship. Turned pro in 1940. 1940 was a very special year. You had Ray Robinson, Ike Williams, Jake LaMotta. Trying to think of all of the guys that turned professional at that time. Ezra Charles. But 1940 was a very special year. But he also faced Milo Bettina, who became a light heavyweight champion after Billy Conn moved up to face Joe Louis. He would also face Anton Christopher's. He was a light heavyweight champion. He faced Joey Maxim, who was also a light heavyweight champion. He was in the ring with Oakland Billy Smith, who became the California light heavyweight champion. Fought Charlie Burley and Lloyd Marshall and Curtis the Hatchet Shepard. Jimmy Bivens was some fighter. Teddy Uros, he was in there with all of those fighters. I always had a special place in my heart for Jimmy Bivens. Now, all of these guys I named so far fought in Madison Square Garden. That's what this video is about. Now, let's take a look at Chester Rico and Walter Carrier. Chester Rico was born May 28, 1917, in the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And at that time, the Lower East Side was full of fighters. On every block, you had a top-rated fighter. It's incredible at that time. And this is going all the way back from the 1920s. But he died June 1981 in New York. I met him as well. He was a welterweight, stood 5 foot 8 inches, and I think he had total boss of 98. If I'm correct, he was 98 total fights, like 65 wins, 14 knockouts. He lost 25 fights. I know that. And he was in there some very good fighters, such as Johnny Bratton, Maxie Shapiro, Arthur King, Freddie Archer, Norman Rubio. I know he fought Bojack and Bob Montgomery. Walter Carey fought him as well. But Chester Rico was a very good fighter. Remember that fight that he fought with Bojack? Oh, some fight that was. Walter Carrier. He was born March 29, 1924, in Bronx, New York. And then he would eventually reside in Mount Vernon, New York. Mount Vernon is a little town right outside of the Bronx, or Westchester County. And he died August 17th, 1995, I believe it was. He was like 71 years old. I met him as well. He was 5 foot 10. He was a middleweight. He had total fights of 61, 46 wins. I remember that. 24 knockouts, 13 losses. I think he was stopped like 10 or 9 times, something like that. But he was in a ring with Willie Troy and Randy Turpin, Randy Sandy, Pierre Langlois. I'm trying to remember these guys. Joey Giardello, Otis Graham, Eugene Hairston. Let me tell you about Eugene Hairston real quick. Eugene Hairston, unfortunately, in fact, I'll get to Eugene Hairston as well. I'll get to him. He was in there with all these guys, Willie Troy, a lot of great fighters, Tony DeMarco. So Walter Carrier was a good fighter, so I just wanted to name those 2 guys for you. Now, you heard me mention Willie Troy to you. He's to your left. And Patty DeMarco. Willie Troy, some fighter. He was born September 6, 1932 in Norfolk, Virginia. And I always remember that because of Pernell Whitaker. But, R.I.P. to him. But Willie Troy was some fighter. He really, really was. He fought out of New York, but he was born in Norfolk. He stood 5 foot 11. He was a middleweight. And he had total fights. So he only had like 41 fights, 33 wins, 23 knockouts. And I think he lost like 6 fights. He was in there with guys like Lester Johnson and Holly Mims, Randy Sandy. Holly Mims was out of Washington, D.C. He fought Jesse Turner, Floyd Patterson, Bobby Dykes. Bobby Dykes was from Texas. He was a pretty decent fighter, was Bobby Dykes. I believe he was a southpaw. Charlie Williams, Joey Giardello, and Willie Green. A lot of great fighters he was in there with was Willie Troy. But he was some fighter. Patty DeMarco. Patty DeMarco became lightweight champion. His name was Pasquale DeMarco. That was his original name. He fought Jimmy Carter, March 5th. And 1954 was at the Cow Palace. I remember that. It was in California. And when he defeated Jimmy Carter, he had lost to Jimmy Carter in a rematch, and Jimmy Carter got his title back. In fact, Jimmy Carter was the only 3-time lightweight champion. Phenomenal fighter was Jimmy Carter. But they called Patty DeMarco the Billy Goat because of his style. He would come forward all the time. And he stood 5 foot 6 inches. He had a 70-inch reach. He was out of Brooklyn, New York. And what's interesting about Patty DeMarco, he would face Boston's Tony DeMarco. A lot of people thought those 2 men were brothers, and they were not. But Tony DeMarco was some good fighter, since we're talking about him. He took the title away from Johnny Saxton. And he had a great 2-war series with Carmen Basilio. So Tony DeMarco was some fighter. But he was also in there with Don Jordan and Kenny Lane. And Kenny Lane was from Big Rapids, Michigan. He was in there with Stephen Radel. Who else was he in there with? Don Jordan, Ralph Dupass, Orlando Zulueta. So Patty DeMarco was some fighter. He really, really was. So salute to Willie Troy and Patty DeMarco. Eugene Hairston to your left and Floyd Patterson. Now I was about to talk about Eugene Hairston, but I wanted to wait till we got to him. Eugene Hairston is something else. He couldn't speak and he couldn't hear. And they used to call him Dummy Eugene Hairston. That's what they used to call him. He goes by Silent Eugene Hairston because he didn't speak. But what was significant about Eugene Hairston, it was because of him that they would put the red blinking lights in Madison Square Garden because he hit a man after the bell. And they were going to disqualify him. They brought it up to the commission's office. And an attorney was brought before the commission because Eugene Hairston had a trainer who was he was well connected. And they got an attorney and they took a look at it. You also had a referee that couldn't hear. But it was because of Eugene Hairston is why you see the red blinking lights in Madison Square Garden today. And my dad told me he remembers exactly when that happened. He was at that fight. Eugene Hairston was some fighter. And he was born July 1st, 1929 in Harlem, New York. He would reside to the Bronx because the kids were teasing him and calling him all kind of names. But he trained in Grubb's gym and then eventually Stillman's gym. He stood 5'9.5" He was a middleweight. And he had 63 total fights. 45 wins, 24 knockouts. He had like 13 losses. He fought Charlie Williams and Norman Rubio, Walter Carrier. He was in there with Charlie Hums from France. He was a middleweight. Ralph Tiger Jones, Hans Stretch, Robert Villemain. Robert Villemain was the Pennsylvania middleweight champion. He would lose his title to the great Sugar Ray Robinson. He was also in there with Patty Young. Charlie Salas, another good middleweight. Paul Pender, who became middleweight champion when he defeated Sugar Ray Robinson. He was in there with Johnny Bratton, who became a welterweight champion. He was out of Chicago. The problem with Johnny Bratton, he used to break his hands a lot. But he fought 12 rounds with a broken jaw. Phenomenal fighter was Johnny Bratton. Cutie boy, they called him a cutie pie. He was a ladies' man. Shiny shoes and a slick hair and the suits and everything else. But Eugene Hairston would also be in there with Lester Felton. He was also a good fighter. And I just wanted to acknowledge Eugene Hairston because of the unfair treatment that he would suffer during those days. But he was a dynamic fighter. My father was pretty good friends with him. They were, in the locker room and everything else. But shout out to Eugene Hairston. Floyd Patterson. He was from Waco, North Carolina. He would move to Brooklyn, New York, then eventually Catskill, and then Troy, New York. He was born January 4th, 1935. And he died May 11th, 2006. He became the New York Boxing Commission. I met him several times. He was 71 years of age at the time of his death. He had a fighting career record of 64 total fights, 55 wins, 40 knockouts. He lost 8 fights and he was stopped 5 times. Now, he was stopped twice by Sonny Liston, once by Muhammad Ali. I gotta tell you, Floyd Patterson was some fighter. He was some fighter. He fought Muhammad Ali and Henry Cooper and George Shafalo and Charlie Green. He fought Ali twice. Jerry Quarry, I believe he fought him twice. Ingemar Johansson 3 times. Eddie Machen. Charles Sonny Liston twice. Roy Harris. All of these guys were top names in his time. Charlie Powell. He was from the San Francisco 49ers. He was, as they say, one of the greatest athletes of all times. Tommy Hurricane Jackson. He fought Jackson in 1956. Now, what was interesting about that fight with Tommy Hurricane Jackson, Rocky Marciano had retired in 1956. He had fought Archie Moore in 1955. So he looked at the landscape and he saw what was coming. So he moved to the side. And so his belt was vacant. So he appointed it with Jim Norris, who he wanted to fight for his belt. Now he already defeated Archie Moore in 1955. So he chose Archie Moore, and would also choose Floyd Patterson. Floyd Patterson was ranked number 1 in the light heavyweight division in 1956. So he chose Floyd Patterson and Archie Moore to fight for his belt in 1956. But Tommy Hurricane Jackson said, hold on a second, I'm ranked number 1, not happening. And he was going to the commission's office. So what they wound up doing is saying that the belt was vacated, so you guys have to fight an elimination match. And so Floyd Patterson would then face Tommy Hurricane Jackson. Fought him twice, once in 56 and once in 57. But that was something else at that time. Patterson would also fight Archie Moore. He would eventually fight Archie Moore in 56. And he would defeat Archie Moore. And he would become the heavyweight champion of the world. He would fight Brian London, Jimmy Slade, Pete Rademacher, Yvonne Durrell. Yvonne Durrell was some fighter from Canada. And he had wars. He was a fisherman. He had wars with Archie Moore. One of the greatest fights in light heavyweight championship history. That was some fight. Floyd Patterson will also face Joey Maxim. He was the light heavyweight champion. He would defeat Sugar Ray Robinson at the Polo Grounds. That fight was in 1952. And then a few months later, he would lose his belt to Archie Moore. But Joey Maxim was some fighter as well. He fought as he charged, fought them all. Floyd Patterson would also fight, who else did he fight? Jesse Turner and Wes Binkham, Lester Jackson. He was in there with a lot of fighters. Floyd Patterson, outstanding fighter. Just couldn't take a heavyweight's punch. Can't consider him an all-time heavyweight great. But as a fighter, he was. He would win the 1956 Helsinki Games as a middleweight, a gold medal. Unbelievable fighter was Floyd Patterson. So salute to him as well. Now these two men here that I'm going to talk about. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Willie Joyce and Jimmy Doyle. Let's take a look at Willie Joyce. He had a remarkable career. Remarkable career. He's a Georgia native, but he fought out of Gary, Indiana. He was born September 2nd, 1937. And, actually, I believe he was born December 5th, 1917. He stood 5 foot 6 inches. He weighed 135 pounds to 147 pounds. And he had 103 total bouts, 71 wins, 16 knockouts. He lost 21 fights. And I got to tell you, he was some fighter. He was some fighter. He was in there with Ike Williams. Fought him twice. Henry Armstrong 3 times. Bobby Ruffin. Willie Pep. Chalky Wright. Chalky Wright was a featherweight champion. He would lose his belt to Willie Pep. And he would retire. And he would go into acting with Mae West. But Chalky Wright was a very good Mexican fighter. Willie Joyce also fought Chester Slider, fought him twice. Luther Slugger White. He was in there with Leo Roddick, if I'm correct. Tippy Larkin and Bojack. Ali Stoltz. Ali Stoltz was from New Jersey. And he fought him 3 times. But Willie Joyce was some fighter. A lot of respect for him. Jimmy Doyle. Now, Jimmy Doyle is most notably known for being stopped and killed in the ring by Sugar Ray Robinson. He had total fights of 53. 42 wins, 14 knockouts. He lost 7 fights and he was stopped 3 times. His last fight was June 25th, 1947. He was only 22 years of age at the time of his death. And he was born August 1st, 1924, if I'm correct. I believe I am. He stood 5 foot 7 inches. He was a welterweight. And like I said, he was in the ring with Sugar Ray Robinson. June 24th, 1947 at the Cleveland Arena. And at that time, Robinson had a fighting career record, 78-1, I think he had 52 knockouts. I know he lost one fight in 1943 against Jake LaMotta. That was his only loss at that time. And the fight went 8 rounds with technical knockout. The referee was Jackie Davis. And he had a premonition before the fight with Jimmy Doyle. And the Catholic priest and the minister and George Gankford, they all told him, you know, after he explained what the premonition was, he had a dream. And he said, I'm going to kill this man. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to hit him with a left hook and I'm going to kill him. And he said, that's just a dream. Because everybody had money on Ray Robinson. Robinson was a hot commodity at that time. He came out of the Golden Gloves in 1940. He won the 39 and 1940 Golden Gloves, all the inner city titles, Chicago, all of them. And he had, you know, somewhere 69 wins. 40 knockouts in the first round. You know, he had 69 knockouts. It's like 80-something wins in the amateurs. And he was a commodity. You know, everybody bet their money on Ray Robinson. So they told him, hey, it's just a dream. So he went in there, and that's what happened. In the 8th round, he hit him a left hook. And Jimmy Doyle died. And Ray Robinson would donate an entire purse to Jimmy Doyle's mother. But Jimmy Doyle was some fighter. He was in the ring with fighters such as Lou Jenkins, defeated him. Ralph Zanelli defeated him. Tommy Bell defeated him. I believe he fought Ralph Zanelli twice. He was in there with Artie Levine from Brooklyn. He would lose to Artie Levine. Who else did he fight? Johnny Green and Bobby Yeager. Bobby Yeager fought a lot out of the West Coast. But, you know, shout out to Jimmy Doyle, R.I.P. to him. Willie Joyce. 2 very good fighters at their time. All right, now we're looking at Johnny Greco and Nick Moran. Johnny Greco was another good fighter, very underestimated. He's underrated. He was born January 10th, 1923. He was from Canada, Montreal or Quebec. He had total fights of 102 bouts. He had like 78 wins, 43 knockouts. I'm pretty sure he lost 18 fights. But he fought Rocky Graziano and Kid Gavilan, Fitzy Putin, Kid Gavilan, Danny Webb, Bob Montgomery, Freddie. Did he fight Freddie Archer? He fought Freddie Archer. I think he fought him twice. Tony Pallone, Cleo Shane, Tony Gennaro. He was in there with Ike Williams. So I can think of the top of my head, but Jimmy Greco was some fighter. He was. Nick Moran. Now, Jimmy Greco was to your left. Nick Moran is to your right. Nick Moran was born December 10th, 1923. He was Mexican. He was born in Mexico. He was a welterweight that stood 5 foot 7 inches. He had total fights of 75. Just amazing the amount of fights the fighters fought that I'm naming here. He fought like 11 times in Madison Square Garden. He had 35 wins, 11 losses, 33 by the knockout route. He was a very hard puncher. He was in there with Charlie Salas, another very, very good fighter. Bobby Dykes, like I told you, he was from Texas, fought him twice. Jesse Fuentes, another good fighter. Jesse Flores, dynamic fighter. He was in the ring with Ray Robinson. Kid Azteca, one of the greatest Mexican fighters in my mind. He had close to 200 fights. He was phenomenal. Bernard Dukerson. You had the Dukerson brothers, Bernard and Maxie. They were out of Louisiana. Bernard Dukerson was a very good fighter. But I just wanted to name Johnny Greco and Nick Moran. 2 good fighters. Salute to them. Oh, I just found out I gotta end this video real quickly. Let me get a couple of more fighters in. I gotta take care of some business here. But Bojack is the next fighter, and Tippy Larkin. 2 great fighters. 2 great fighters that know each other very well. Bojack, he was born March 1st, 1921 in Augusta, Georgia. I spoke about him a lot. Type him in, Scrapbook Boxing, you'll learn a little bit more about Bojack. He stood 5 foot 6 inches. He had a 68-inch reach. He was in the ring with Ike Williams 3 times. One of the most memorable moments of Bojack was in 1948 when he fought Ike Williams, 6-round knockout. That was one of the most brutal contests you could think of. Bojack fought in Madison Square Garden the most times, 21 times. main events. Phenomenal fighter he was. He was in there with Bob Montgomery. Fought him several times. Matter of fact, they exchanged championship belts. Henry Armstrong in 1943. Fought Tippy Larkin, Del Flanagan, Lou Jenkins, Fitzy Putin, Maxie Berger. Who else did he fight? Bobby Ruffin, Willie Joyce. Unbelievable fighter he was. He had 121 total bouts. Like 91 wins, 24 losses, 44 knockouts. I think he was stopped 4 times, if my memory serves me correctly. But he was some fighter. Was Bojack. Tippy Larkin. I got to end this quickly. He was born November 11th, I believe, 1917, Garfield, New Jersey. He was a welterweight, stood 5'7". He had a 71-inch reach. He had total bouts of 146, 131 wins, 58 knockouts, like 13 losses. He was stopped. I can't remember, like maybe 14 or 16 times. He was stopped a lot, but he had a lot of fights. A lot of fights. He was in there with Bojack. Fought him December 18th, 1942. And that's how the title exchanged hands. But he fought fighters such as Charlie... Who did he fight? Charlie Williams. Charlie Davis as well. Fought him twice. Henry Armstrong. Fought him March 8th, 1943, Armstrong. Leo Ruddock. Kid Gavilan. Del Flanagan. Johnny Gonzalez. Fantastic fighter he was, Tippy Larkin. Gotta get going to the next fighter. All right, these two men right here, very special. Very, very, very special. Very special fighters they were. Elmer Ray. They called him Elmer Violent Ray. He was born March 3rd, 1911, in Federal Point, Florida. And he stood 6 foot 2 inches. He was a heavyweight. He had total fights of 135, 98 wins, 69 knockouts. He lost 23 fights and he was stopped, I believe it was 9 times. He was in the ring with Ezra Charles, Lee Savoy, Jersey Joe Walcott, Johnny Holman, J.D. Turner, Turkey Thompson, Phil Johnson. Phil Johnson was Howard Johnson's father. He was a pretty good fighter out of Philadelphia. He was in there with Leroy Haynes. Who else was he in there with? Jersey Joe Walcott. Oh, man, can't think of anybody else. That's crazy. My mind sometimes goes blank. Obie Walker. I know he was in there with Obie Walker like 13 times. Like, he fought Obie Walker a lot of times. Obie Walker was colored heavyweight champion. But Elmer Ray was some fighter. Ray Robinson. Ray Robinson had a fighting record of 201 bouts, 174 wins, 109 knockouts, 19 losses. He was stopped 1 time by Joey Maxim in 1952 at the Polo Grounds. And he wasn't actually stopped. He couldn't continue because his potassium ran out of his body. He had 6 draws. And he was born May 5th, 1921 in Alley, Georgia. He died April 12th, 1989. I met him 2 different occasions. That was one of the highlights of my life, meeting Ray Robinson twice. He was in the ring with Jake LaMotta, fought him 6 times. He beat him 5 times and lost once. He was in the ring with Gene Foreman several times, won and lost the title from him. In fact, that's the highlight knockout. Beautiful left hook, and he knocked out Gene Foreman. First time and only time Gene Foreman's ever been knocked out. Carmen Basilio, who was a welterweight middleweight champion. He fought Carmen Basilio, I believe it was 1957. Outstanding fight between these 2 men. Fight of the year each time they fought. He was in there with Randy Turpin, 51. He lost to him and got his title back in 51. Bobo Olsen fought him several times. Joey Maxim fought him in 52. And he was fighting for the light heavyweight championship strap. Couldn't continue in 14 rounds. He was in there with Terry Downs. Terry Downs became a middleweight champion when he defeated Paul Pender. Paul Pender would defeat Terry Downs again and then lose his title to Gene Foreman. Ray Robinson was in the ring with Paul Pender twice. Paul Pender was out of Boston. He was in the ring with Jose Basora, would knock him out 1 round. He was in the ring with Henry Armstrong in 1943. I got to get going, unfortunately, but I just wanted to name some fighters to you. Tippy Larkin was also in the ring with Ike Williams, Terry Young, Bob Montgomery, Sammy Angot. These names start coming to me now. Al Bummy Davis. Who else was he in there with? Juan Zarita. But let me get going. I got to get back to you guys. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters never be forgotten on my channel. I'm going to make a series out of this, but these are the fighters that fought in Madison Square Garden. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of fighters that I want to go over. And like I said, it was put together by my father and I. And it's very special because it was a lot of programs we had to, cut out to get all these fighters in there. A lot of them, stacks and stacks of them. Had a great time doing it. And if you don't know the story, we used to go to the gym and come back like twice a week, and we would make scrapbooks. And we did it for, 30-something years, almost 40 years. And it was a pleasure to me to do that. I did it since I was 7 years old. And these things mean so much to me because, my mom and dad had separated, and it was a chance for my dad and I to spend time together. And he taught me so much about boxing, everything he knew about it, and he knew a lot. He knew all of those fighters. He knew the politics of it. He had so much memorabilia when he was coming up. He was a special person. So this is in behalf of my dad. So thanks for hanging in there with me once again. Salute to these great fighters. I'll be doing more as time to come. Thanks for watching.